Well, hello friends. I'd like to thank you for inviting me back into your homes today. I've got a wonderful video for you, and I'm excited to share it with you. So let's get started. Alright, I'm starting to get sick and tired of this wig, so I think we're almost done. So yes, in today's video we are modeling, or we're painting the trees and the grasses that are meant to blend in with our modeled portion of our scenery here. And a couple quick caveats. I am painting, I am modeling the Pacific Northwest in early spring. So lots of yellow and brown grasses, lots of pine trees. If you're, modeling the Appalachian Mountains in full-on summer, your color palette's going to be different. Your trees are going to be a little different. But hopefully a lot of the same techniques and design philosophies and other things I talk about in this video will work for you as well. I highly encourage everyone to take a look at Bob Ross videos, honestly. His techniques for painting trees and grasses and stuff can be applied to anyone's model railroad. The really tricky part is just mixing colors and making them all look good together, blending it all together. And that's what will be a lot of the focus of today's video. So before we get started, let's talk about the materials we're going to need to create our backdrop. First, let's talk about the paint. I use the Liquitex Basics line of acrylics. This is like an artist grade acrylic, if you will. It is a very nice quality acrylic paint at a pretty darn good price. I get mine at Michael's. If you wait and keep an eye out, there's usually a sale. I think I got these buy one, get one half off sale. So I bought them all together in one big go. What's great about Liquitex Basics is they mix well together, and they're also archival quality and UV protectant, so they're not going to fade over time. A lot of your craft paints that you'll get at like Walmart or whatever have a tendency to fade with UV light and that kind of thing over time. And since we're going to be spending so much time making sure we're matching the foreground and background elements, I want to avoid, if at all possible, my background fading. Now, you don't have to get all these colors. We're not going to be using all these colors for this particular backdrop. We'll be using yellow, Mars black, titanium white, some neutral gray, raw sienna, and we'll maybe throw in a little bit of raw umber there. And this is all we're really going to need to create all the colors that we're going to use on our backdrop. I may end up coming in here a little bit later and maybe adding a little bit of red in there if I feel like I need to warm it up a little bit. We'll see when we get to that stage of the painting process. But you could start with these colors and add more later if you'd like. These colors will take you very far. We will also be using Liquitex acrylic medium. I use this quite a bit on my layout for a number of different reasons. Oftentimes it's a great glue. When you mix it with acrylic medium, with acrylic paints, the acrylic medium here, it just improves the flow. The acrylic paint tends to be a little thick, so it just thins it out a little bit, makes it a little bit easier to apply to your backdrop. You'll want a palette knife. Palette knives are used for mixing up paints. Don't mix up with a brush. Use something like a palette knife to mix your paint. It'll go a lot easier on you, save your brushes. I get these from Amazon. They come in a pack of like 5 or 6 different shapes for under $10. They're very, very cheap. You'll want a nice quality sort of flat brush in a couple different sizes. I kind of have like a little bit of a larger size here, kind of a medium size, and then a small size. These I get from Walmart for like about $5 for a pack of 5 or 6 of them. They're fairly cheap. You don't need fantastic brushes for your backdrop. Save your fantastic brushes for your models themselves. And finally, fan brushes. I don't get these at Walmart. I have not been able to find good fan brushes at Walmart. Instead, I got these on Amazon. They came in a pack of, I think, it's like 6 or 8 different fan brushes for around $10. So you can get them for cheap. And finally, palette paper. So instead of like a plastic palette for mixing your paint up, I like using palette paper. It looks just like a pad of paper. The paper itself is like a waxed, kind of smooth wax finish. And what's great about it is, you can apply your colors on here, you can mix your colors up on here, and when you're done, just rip the page off of the palette and throw it away. It's just super easy to clean up, and anything that I can do to make cleanup easier, I do it, because I tend to find that if cleanup is easy, I am more excited about coming down and actually working on the layout, knowing that I won't have to spend a long time kind of picking up after myself when I'm done. So with all these materials, we have everything we need to begin painting our layout. Okay, so this is the scene that we're going to be painting the backdrop behind today. As you can see, it's mostly finished at this point. I want to add a few more color variations of grasses and bushes and that kind of thing in the scene, just to add a little more texture and interest. But for the most part, this is what I would consider pretty much done. I know what my trees are going to look like. I know what the grass and the bushes are going to look like. And so then I can begin to replicate this look on my backdrop. Unlike the last video with the sky and distant mountains, you can kind of apply that backdrop very, very early on in your process, when you just get the bench work up. And I highly encourage you to do so, because it adds a lot of drama and depth to your scene. Something like this, where we are going to be trying to blend our backdrop into our foreground, we want to have a very good idea of what that foreground ends up looking like before we do that. It would be not the best effect if, we thought our foreground was going to be more green than it was, and we painted a nice green backdrop, and then only to find that, like, as we started applying colors and stuff to our grasses, the grasses ended up being much more yellow, or vice versa, right? So you don't have to model all the scenery on your layout before you start your backdrop, but one small section that's going to be a good representative of what the rest of the scenery on your layout looks like. I would suggest getting that done first, so that you can have a good sort of starting place and understanding of what the colors are going to look like, and so then you can apply that to the backdrop. So we're going to remove all of our trees here to kind of clear the scene in order to begin to paint that backdrop. One thing I want to do first, though, is kind of mark about the heights of the trees in my scene, so that I know that as I create my backdrop, I'm not really going to screw up the height of the trees that are visible on that backdrop too much. What I mean by that is, we don't want our backdrop trees to be like, a lot taller than the trees that are in the foreground. When we get our camera down low and we're kind of shooting through these trees, we want the trees in the foreground to really kind of stand up higher than the trees in the background. And that'll give us that sense of depth that we're looking for. If those trees in the background were too high and we're shooting our camera here, it'll look like, it'll look like we're sort of like the hills are kind of rolling upwards, even though they're really not. And we're going to kind of get a little bit of weird perspective, I guess, is a good way to say that. We want only our modeled trees to really kind of, that tree line to really kind of show in the backdrop. And so that's kind of going to be what we focus on as far as sizing of trees and stuff as we go along. You can have some of your backdrop trees be a little bit larger and higher than the foreground trees. That's not a huge deal. But overall, we want the effect that these foreground trees are tall and close up, and the background trees are tall but further away. So I'm going to go ahead and mark in my scene here just a couple of spots with a pencil, some little vertical lines of where I think I want the height of those background trees to be in a couple of places. So that we don't inadvertently make them too large. And then I can remove my trees from the scene. All right, the first step in the process I'm going to tackle is I'm going to actually paint on some of these bare deciduous trees onto the background. The trees here are kind of a grayish dark brown. And so we're going to go ahead and mix up a little bit of paint in order to, as best as possible, sort of mimic the color of trees like this. So to do that, we're going to go with a couple of colors here. We're going to go with Liquitex Raw Umber and Liquitex Neutral Gray. So kind of a grayish, dark brown, right? So let's go ahead and just put, we're not going to put a ton of, make a ton of trees, so we don't need a ton of paint, just a little dab here. And a little dab of the gray. About half and half. And we are going to, with our palette knife here, just kind of come in here and then just start mixing these two colors together. Just a really simple first color to kind of try to recreate, right? Alrighty, let's take a look at these colors together. As I look at this, I think it looks pretty darn close. My deciduous trees are kind of all over the place as far as the level of brown versus gray, so if I don't get it super perfect here, that's perfectly fine. I think that this color is pretty close to a lot of my deciduous trees, so we're going to go with that. That looks pretty good to me. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add just, now that I've got my color mixed up, add just a drop or two of matte medium and mix that into there. And all that's going to do is just, it's going to thin it down a little bit and make it work, make it flow a little bit nicer onto the backdrop. And one thing I kind of learned is I'm not great at making these kind of bare branch deciduous trees, which is fine, because what I'm going to do is paint them on, and then the trees that I don't like, I'm actually going to paint over top of with my evergreen trees, which I do a much better job of. And all the techniques I'm showing you today are kind of that way, which is like, do the best you can, but don't worry too much about it if you don't get it right, because you can always paint over top. When you're applying paint to your brush, you're going to want to, when you load your brush, just be careful about applying too much paint. Try not to get paint all the way up to the end here. Try to keep it on sort of the front half of your brush. And then avoid big globs of paint on your brush as much as possible. If you do get big globs on your brush, kind of wipe it off. You want your brush to kind of maintain its look and its shape as much as possible in that nice thin edge. And that'll just help you as you come in here to create those thinner lines. All right, next we're going to tackle our grasses here. And you know, I'm modeling early spring, so my grasses are going to be kind of yellow and brown from the last season. A lot of you will be modeling spring, summer. You know, the grasses are going to be more green and that color. I'll show you how to do some green later on when I'm doing pine trees, but we'll focus on the yellowish brown for these here. We're going to start by recreating this kind of darker brownish color of this grass right in this area here. It's a little bit more tricky than the trees. It's going to take maybe a few more colors to get right, and a little more playing around to get right. But we'll see what we can do. I'm going to start with a little bit of raw sienna. Give myself a little more paint here. And then we're going to mix in some of the neutral gray. I like using neutral gray to help tone down the effects of a color. It's really kind of a just a way to sort of reduce the intensity of a single color and to bring it a little more into like a neutral scheme. So as I take a look at that here, this is probably a little too red still and maybe a little bright as well. So at this point we're going to bring in a little bit of raw umber. This is a little bit of a darker brown color. I'm not going to put a ton of it on here. With acrylic colors, a little bit of dark goes a long way. So we're going to start off with just a little bit of that raw umber right now. And we're going to mix it in and see what that does. And as I take a look here, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. This has got a little bit more warmth in it than this does at this point. So let's go ahead and add just a hint of red. So I got a little dot of red there. We're going to kind of mix that into the scene and see what that does. Yeah, I think that the red is really helping out with that. But this is a little bit lighter. There's a little bit more of a, I can get a little bit of a sort of a white, sort of, I don't know, haze. There's a little hint of white kind of coming into there. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of white at this time. Just to lighten that up. We'll start with a little bit, see if we need to add more. And I hope you can see what I'm doing when I'm mixing these colors like this. I'm not putting a bunch of colors all at once on the palette and mixing them all together. Instead, what I'm really doing is I'm coming in here and I'm trying to get first the kind of color family that it belongs to. And then I'm trying to kind of get by adding a little bit of red, make it, push it towards the warm or the cool side a little bit, just to kind of get it a little bit closer to that color. And then by adding the white, I'm adjusting the brightness up or down if I need to add some black or whatever to up or down in order to kind of get it right where it needs to be. So I don't know if you can see the way the light shines, it might affect this thing a little weird, but this is pretty close at this point. It's pretty close. I'm going to add just a hint of raw umber back into it again, because I think I might have gone a little too light. And let's add a little bit more. That might be too much. But we can always come back, push it back the other direction again if we need to. So I'm only adding one color at a time. I'm not adding a ton of color all at once. I add a color, mix it, see where I need to go from there. Add another color, mix it, see where I need to go from there, until I end up with something that I like a lot. Okay? And as I look at it, that's pretty great. I think that that's pretty darn good. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to kind of come through here a couple of times with a couple of different shades of color to add sort of texture and variety to this backdrop area. So if it's not perfect, that's fine. You can come back over it and make adjustments later on. I'm going to add a few drops of the matte medium there to thin it down a little bit more. Help it to sort of improve the flow. And I'm going to start applying to the backdrop in kind of vertical, kind of stabby motions here. As if these are like individual little grasses and stuff that are kind of sticking up out of the scene a little bit. And you'll see right here, this isn't a perfect match between the backdrop and the foreground. It'll dry a little bit of a different shade of color. But what I can do then is, if that's not perfect, that's fine. I'll just come back with a slightly different color over top of that to try to get it a little closer. And those two colors kind of mixing together on the backdrop will add a bunch of texture and give the eye the impression of a bunch of different kinds of grasses. Okay, this has had a little bit of time to dry, and in a lot of areas the color's looking pretty great. Kind of back in this area here, pretty good. Over here, maybe a little too light. So what we're going to do actually is we're going to take the color that's left on our palette here and lighten it up a little bit to kind of match, blend what's going on here a little bit better. And then we'll lay it over top. So add a little bit of white and then go ahead and start mixing. The important thing I want you to learn from this is that perfection is not the goal of what we're doing here. Our goal really is, again, and I keep saying it, but our goal is to get it close and to give the impression that what's happening in the foreground is also happening in the background as well. And I can see already as I'm starting to apply it into my scene here that the effect that I'm getting is pretty nice. Vertical stabs to kind of get some of the grass texture in there. Turn it horizontally to kind of begin to sort of blend it in with the area around it. And you can see how those two colors, the darker color and then this lighter color, begin to start to mix together on my backdrop in order to add that sort of texture. Gives it a sense of shadow and depth. And if we got some areas that don't look super great, that's fine. You're actually going to come back over this again with the lighter yellow color for this grass and blend everything together even more. By the way, this kind of, I didn't mention before, this sort of lighter, this brown shape right here, that kind of the shape of the hill that I've painted on the backdrop previously, that was actually done with brown latex paint. What I did was my initial sort of layer of paint on top of my foam hills here, I covered all that in a brown latex paint to kind of simulate mud. And then I just continued that onto the backdrop as well, so that I have kind of the shape of the hill in the backdrop that I can then go back to later and paint on top of. So that's all that is right there. Okay, so now that that darker brown has had a chance to dry, we're going to go ahead and come in here and lay in this lighter tan color here that represents the yellowish grass. And so we're going to do basically the same as what we did before. We're just going to mix up a color and try to match it as close as possible. Paint it on there. And then once it has a chance to dry, go back and make the necessary adjustments to the color to bring it kind of closer in line with the static grass scenery. And we're going to go ahead and mix those up to kind of create a yellow color that is a little muted. Now, one thing with the yellow, and we'll get into this more once we get into actually painting our trees, is as you can kind of start to see, adding any sort of gray or black will actually make that yellow very much green. And so the trick with using these kind of acrylics to paint your backgrounds is you don't actually really need to use the bottle of green. You will make your own green using yellow and black. And it will match your woodland scenics style ground films pretty darn closely. So you can see just how green that is. I'm just going to add in some more yellow again. This one's a little trickier for sure, but we'll get it there. We'll get it there. Okay. Still very green. I'm going to add in some, a little bit of raw sienna to kind of orange it up a little bit. And that'll bring back a bit of that goldenness that the yellow brings to it. Okay, so we're getting closer to that color family that we want. But very, very orange. But that's okay, because we have our white. That white will lighten that up. quite a bit. It's going to be a little on the bright side. I'm going to add back in a little bit of gray. Not a ton, but just a bit. And that'll dull that down a little bit. There we go. See, it was getting a little too bright, a little too vibrant. So that gray really kind of helps to dull that down a little bit more. And what we got now, I don't know how well this is going to show up on camera, but it's a bright, kind of yellowy color. But we're going to lay that on there and see how that looks, and see. These colors will tend to dry a little bit darker, so we're going to lay that on and just see how that looks once that goes on there. All right, let's go ahead and start to lay that into place. And I'm just stabbing it into the scene. Nice vertical strokes and horizontal strokes. We're just kind of laying it in place. And let me just bring this camera in kind of close so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Doing these kind of vertical short strokes. And then towards the bottom, we're just kind of mushing it in here. And you can see, again, I am not being very cautious as far as trying to get like the perfect shapes, the perfect little textural bits. We are creating an impressionistic kind of style of backdrop here. Very loose and painterly. And a loose painterly backdrop like this is very forgiving. Your eye will forgive a lot of these kind of real loose and kind of wild brush strokes. There's a concept in filmmaking called the Uncanny Valley. You may be familiar with it, but it's often talked about around special effects and animation and that kind of thing. And it's this idea that like the closer something is to reality as far as how it looks, the more scrutiny our brains kind of place on it. And so therefore, the less willing our brains are to kind of accept it if it's not 100% correct. Good example of this would be the film Incredibles. You have human characters in this highly stylized, kind of cartoony film that's three-dimensional and still realistic in a lot of ways. But that stylized approach to the design and execution of those characters really allows the viewer to accept it for what it is. And we've all seen special effects where the goal was hyper-realism, but something would be off, right? So like, maybe the characters looked, the skin of the human models was a little plasticky looking, and so our brains didn't really accept it. That's the Uncanny Valley. And that's what we want to avoid with our backdrops. So by going with a little more of a stylized approach to a backdrop, we're giving the viewer just enough information so that they'll accept what they see without scrutinizing it too much. And once all our scenery is in place and our trains are running through the scene, nobody's really looking at the background. At that point, its job is really to just serve to deepen the scene a little bit. So that kind of tannish yellow has dried, and it's dried pretty yellow. So I went ahead and made some adjustments to the color. I added in some gray. If you can see right there, added in a little bit of gray, a little bit of the what is it, the raw sienna color there, and adjusted it a little bit just to get it closer to the color of the static grass here. And so we're just going to kind of come back in here and over the top of this, apply same technique, same kind of stabbing and moving around of the paint right over top. And a combination of this kind of more muted tan look with the brighter yellow will just blend everything together in a very nice way. We are racing to the finish line, and that means we are about ready to paint ourselves some pine trees. Really excited about this part. This part's a lot of fun. Again, really important that you have some of your trees kind of finished and on your layout so that you can make sure you can, as much as possible, blend your background trees into your model trees. And as we take a look at our model trees, we see lots of real dark areas of dark green, and then where the light is hitting these lighter, much lighter areas of lighter green. And we're going to simulate that with our colors here. We're going to do it with two colors, Mars Black and Cadmium Yellow. And with these two color combinations, we can do basically any kind of color green in like the Woodland Scenics green family of colors. Sort of the classic Woodland Scenics colors. Really all you need is a little bit of black and a little bit of yellow, and we can create our colors. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually create the sort of deep, almost black green that will represent the really shadowy areas of the trees. So we're just going to kind of mix in yellow into our black. We can see how it's starting to turn green, and just depending on how much yellow and how much black you mix together will determine the color of that really kind of deep, dark green. A little more yellow. Okay, we'll compare it with the underside of this tree here. These trees are made with a combination of a kind of a dark Woodland Scenics ground foam and a lighter green ground foam. And I think that that color right there matches that pretty good. So we will take our matte medium flow improver to that color and mix it in real good. And now we are ready to grab our fan brush and go to town. So we're going to load up our fan brush with paint and look a little something like this. Make sure your bristles are kind of packed together kind of nicely like that. And we're going to come in here and we're going to start to paint our trees. I got this little pencil line that I marked at the very beginning, so I know the kind of like the tree height I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw a straight line down there. This will be kind of a guide for myself as I go to add the tree itself. What I'm going to do is come in here and with the edge of my brush just at the very top of the tree, kind of just gently start to lay in back and forth the shape of the top of that tree. Let me get you a little bit of a better angle on it. Back and forth, back and forth. A little bit wider as I go until I get all the way towards the bottom. Any little bits like that that kind of shoot off to the side, that's happening because as I can see my brush is starting to get a little flailed there. That means I need to get more paint on my brush. Okay, loaded up with more paint, ready to come back here onto the canvas. And don't worry if it's not 100% perfect. You're going to come back here a couple more times with a couple different colors of paint, and you'll make some adjustments as you go. Okay, there's one happy little tree. Let's go ahead and give him a friend right over here. One right, right, a nice vertical line right there. Start with the edge. And I'm going to give it a little bit of a tip right there. And work it on down into the base of the scenery. Let's add another tree right about here. I've got like a seam where I don't know if you can see on the camera, but there's a seam here where I've got two pieces of masonite that kind of come together. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that seam by adding a tree right about here. You can see that it's starting to get, the brush strokes are starting to get a little on the messy side. That is because my brush, again, is starting to get a little splayed. So we just need to come back here, add a little more paint, and carry on. Now what I'm going to do is I am not going to paint a giant wall of pine trees here. Even though in real life, you know, it can be kind of dense with pine trees in this part of the country, I'm going to leave space. I'm going to paint them in kind of clumps and leave some space in between, because what I want, sorry about my dogs, there's probably somebody over right now. But what I want is when I have my modeled trees, I want to be able to see through those to see the trees that are painted on the backdrop. And then further, I want to see through the trees painted on the backdrop to see the mountains in the deep backdrop. And so by painting these trees in little clumps, and then leaving space in between these clumps, that's where I can kind of add my modeled trees. I can create the look of a thick wooded scene, but still allow that negative space to kind of peek through. And that's what I want. Alrighty, so the first layer has dried, and I went back and I added some kind of grayish brown tree trunks in a few of those trees, just kind of simulate the trunks we see on the trees here. And then I've mixed up a lighter color green. We're going to go back over the top of these trees with this lighter color green to kind of match these highlighted areas that we're seeing on the modeled portions of our trees. And I'm going to be using a flat brush here to do this, just because I have a little bit more control with that flat brush. And I'm going to kind of come in here and just pick out kind of layers of those trees right there, and then just apply that lighter green color on top. One thing with this green is it does tend to dry a lot darker than you'd expect. So we go a little bit lighter on the green than we're really looking for when we mix it. So that when it dries in a manner that looks good with the model trees that are going to be positioned in front of it. So we're just kind of picking out kind of the areas where we're going to just hit the tops of those branches. So not the whole tree doesn't get this green, just portions. And this is pretty much the last step in the process of painting the backdrop. All right, and the backdrop is complete. Let me bring the camera in close so you can kind of see some of the paint details there. And you can see just how loose I am with all of my paint strokes here. And how simple the color palette is too. It's not a lot of colors there. And everything is very impressionistic as far as how it's applied to the backdrop. So it goes on quickly, and that sort of quick, sort of messy look actually, when you pull back and then look at the whole thing together, actually ties in really nicely. Alrighty, the final step is just to come back in here and place our modeled trees back into the scene. You can see I've got these areas where I've kind of got clumps of trees, clumps of trees, clumps of trees, clumps of trees, and then space in between. I'm going to want to actually place my trees so that I'm kind of filling in that space a little bit. With the idea that, like, as I kind of look into my scene, I'm seeing model trees, and I'm kind of seeing in between those and the painted trees into the distant mountains beyond. And as I begin to fill the scene out again, it's starting to come together. And the goal really is just to watch that background kind of just disappear. I've had an exciting journey, and I'm so happy you joined me on this wonderful adventure. Hopefully this video has inspired you to paint your own backdrops. I'll see everyone in another video. Take care, friends.